Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the FileForms Business Compliance Podcast. We're super excited to have a new guest today, Kishore Siva from Elios Franchise Advisors. Obviously, at FileForms, we serve all types of businesses and professionals, but we've really found a niche within the franchise community. A lot of franchise groups, as Kishore will dive into in his presentation, have significant needs, broadly speaking, from an operational standpoint, but more specifically from a compliance standpoint. FileForms has been a tremendous partner to franchise groups of all shapes and sizes, and I'm really excited for this opportunity to explore all the different types of franchise groups that exist out there, because there are quite a few that exist outside of just the normal kind of food and beverage that a lot of folks probably think of. So Kishore, why don't you tell us a little bit of background about yourself and Elios, and we can jump right into the presentation here.
Yeah, Frank, thanks so much for inviting me on the podcast, and delighted to have the opportunity to speak about franchising and some of the trends that are coming up. So my background is I spent 25 years in banking, most of that in New York, a couple of years in London. And I got to a point in my career where I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. So about 5.5 years ago, I actually made the switch to entrepreneurship, first as a franchisee, helping an emerging franchise build their US model. And I did that for several years. And then over the last 3 years, I actually started Elios Franchise Advisors. And what we really are trying to do is helping typically individuals and groups of individuals to find their entrepreneurship opportunity to match with any of 750 plus brands across just about every industry you could think of, and helping people navigate what could be an overwhelming process. We also work with businesses that are looking to expand and grow through franchising. And we work throughout not only the United States, but also globally. So we've had placements all over the world, and also with individuals looking to come to the US. But the majority of our clients are US domestic and looking for a business ownership opportunity locally. I'm based in New York, about 45 minutes north of the city.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that great overview. And I think, we certainly want to dive into, the business ownership side, but then also really what CPAs and attorneys know, what kind of resources exist out there, so that they could better serve their clients, because obviously that's a big part of the FileForms community. And Kishore and I had the benefit of meeting through the American Business Associates networking group, and Bob Middleman was the one who introduced us, and it's been great building a relationship since that event. So Kishore, let's jump right into it here on screen. So feel free to take it away, and would love to just kind of hear your thoughts on kind of where folks can get started, and kind of what people should keep in mind as they go down this path.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest trends that we've seen over the last few years is, and you alluded to it in your intro, the evolution of franchising to become a lot more than just food. And so when I think of franchising, and a lot of people think of franchising, McDonald's comes to mind, Dunkin' Donuts comes to mind, Subway sandwiches come to mind, and those are great examples of franchises. But there are so many other industries represented in the franchising world, because ultimately franchising is a business model, right? It allows a company to grow by licensing its rights to operate in various territories and locations via a franchise model. And that's why you see franchising in so many other areas, such as home services. So when we say home services, think of everything that occurs inside and outside of the home: lawn care, painting, flooring, garage, kitchen remodeling, bathroom remodeling, HVAC, plumbing, etc. And there's so many franchise examples in each of those verticals. We see so much growth right now in children's education franchises, senior care. Senior care might be one of the fastest growing segments out there. There's a big trend towards people wanting to stay in their home. And so home health agencies are a franchise business growing and booming. Health and wellness, the gym you might be attending, or the niche fitness or Pilates studio that you're attending, cycle bar that you might be attending, very well it could be a franchise. And then on the B2B side, on the commercial side, we see a lot of professional services franchises, whether that's in the B2B consulting space, it could be in areas such as executive coaching, recruiting, et cetera, staffing, as well as technology. So that's just and that's just scratching the surface. We literally could probably spend the next hour going through every type of franchise and not even cover everything. But those are just some examples of some of the faster growing franchises. And we are seeing also lower startup costs in the franchise space. Now, if you think of a McDonald's as an example, that is a very, very large investment. But why is it such a large investment? Well, when you think about a McDonald's, what are their two biggest costs? It's going to be the space, i.e., the real estate, and the staffing, the people, right? Well, there's so many franchises now that don't require space, and we'll talk about that trend in a moment, and don't require lots of people. And so the cost base for franchising has come down considerably. And the trend is also towards more and more franchises that don't need actual bricks and mortar to operate.
Certainly. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really interesting to see the variance in all the different opportunities that business owners have out there to really jump into a franchise model, all the different, service lines and different industries you covered there. And obviously, when you kind of get started, it all comes down to really starting an LLC is usually that first step. So a lot of franchise groups that we've found will set up a management company that will house the real estate and kind of really be that foundational piece to go and start investing to kind of bring their franchise dream to fruition. So what do we have next here? The corporate refugee era? Why don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind me touching on the point you just made, Frank, I think that is such an important point. I have clients all the time that are saying to me, okay, I'm getting close to deciding which franchise brand I'm ready to move forward with, but I'm told I need to set up a legal entity or I need to have some sort of either an LLC or an S Corp or a C, whatever the case is. And I don't even know where to start. And that's where I think being able to work with a company like yours in FileForms can be so important to really navigate many of those options in a way that also helps the client figure out, well, and how do I do this? What do I do next? So I think that is really, really important.
Yeah, I'm curious, how many of the folks that you work with are kind of first-time business owners where you have to kind of teach them these things versus vetted owners who, have kind of gone down the path of purchasing assets before?
Yeah, I would say the majority are first-time business owners. I do get sometimes some experienced entrepreneurs that are looking for their next opportunity, but more often than not, it's going to be the corporate refugee that we see on this slide, right? It's a lot of ex-bankers, technology professionals, people coming from healthcare, sometimes consulting firms, and more you're seeing that trend of the fact that being with the same company for 40 years is just not a realistic career trajectory the way it might have been certainly in prior generations. And so more and more, we're seeing some very successful executives that are 20 plus years into their career and thinking, well, what's next for me? And entrepreneurship gives them that control, that flexibility. And it's more than just the profitability, right? The obvious that they're going to be looking for a business that is going to be very strong financially and has the potential to do that, but is not. It's more than just how much money is this making. It's going to be how do I actually integrate what I'm doing into the life I want to lead. And then the other trend we're seeing also is executives or professionals who are maybe a little earlier in that than 20 years in. Maybe they're 10 to 15 years in. They like their job, but they realize that they want something as a secondary income stream. And we've seen a number of successful franchisees in that space. Now, I think this raises an interesting point, which is we consider this the executive model, right? And a number of franchise brands will be supportive of an executive model, either initially or once the franchise is up and running. And what does that mean? The executive model is really a model whereby the franchise owner is not necessarily running the day-to-day. They appoint a manager who is actually going to run the day to day. And they're taking on more of a chair type role. And that allows them to have other business interests or even a job, etc. But this is where it's really important that anyone evaluating a franchise brand is very careful. I am not a fan of the word passive or absentee as a franchise owner, because if you think about either one of those suggest that the franchise owner doesn't have to act or take action, right? And here's the issue. You could appoint the best manager possible, but if that person suddenly wins the lottery and gives you notice, well, all of a sudden the owner needs to be involved at that point, right? So an executive model is probably a more realistic option. I would be very, very careful about if a brand is trying to sell themselves as a passive investment or an absentee model. And this is where, by the way, when we talk about the need for CPAs and attorneys to give sound advice to their clients, this is an area where we see attorneys and CPAs really helping their clients as they evaluate potential options as well.
Very interesting. I'm curious, what kind of circling back to the last slide a little bit, what kind of nest egg would you say most folks come to you with in order to kind of go down one of these paths, independent of the industry? Obviously, some are more asset light, but is there kind of an average?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the range is huge, right? I mean, I will say be wary of any franchise opportunity that is saying, oh, for $20,000, you can own a franchise. I would question the support and the opportunity that franchise brand is going to provide. But I will say I've seen some very robust franchise brands that are all in investments less than 100,000, typically in the professional services space. I think that's going to be key. And in that space, I would say if someone has a really strong business development background, they can really be very successful in those types of models. I would say when we talk about home services, senior care, some of the other models that are still not as heavy on real estate and full-time personnel, you would probably say, this could be low six figures. So in kind of the 100 to 250 range on average are a lot of investments in that. And then obviously when you start thinking about any franchise brand that requires real estate, now you're talking about a bigger investment typically as well. But there are plenty of excellent options that all in the investment range would probably be 200 in the low twos or below. And obviously that doesn't mean the franchise owner has to pay that out of pocket up front. Often we see franchisees using SBA lending and other alternative financing options as well. And that's where, again, a CPA can be very helpful in making recommendations to their clients for funding sources, as can we in terms of our franchise consulting roles.
Very interesting. And are most of the opportunities you're working on, are they individuals? Are they partnerships of different investors? Help me understand.
Great question. I've seen both, right? I have seen some partnerships where I have a client right now where it's 4 individuals that have gotten together. It's 4 longtime friends that have decided that they are going to work together. And they've had some professional collaborations before. So they kind of know each other's strengths and skills, et cetera, and they complement each other well. So that's one example. I've seen a lot of husband and wife teams or spouse teams that can work really well also. And then I've seen individuals. So it's really a mix.
Interesting. So help me understand some of the technology that's really useful in all the different workflows. I'm sure this day and age with the prevalence of AI and all the different tools out there that are, really helping entrepreneurs start businesses and run businesses much, much more easier than before. Sure, that's driven down startup costs quite a bit too, but would love to kind of better understand kind of the technology infrastructure that you recommend or kind of see thematically across the clients you work with in the franchise community?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we're seeing a lot more is the ability to operate a franchise without everyone being in the same location. So kind of remote operation franchises. And why that actually is important is that will bring down a key expense that a franchise brand or franchisee, I should say, might have up front. And I think COVID taught a lot of franchise brands that they can operate remotely. And so even some brands that if we had this conversation 6 years ago, would have required the franchisee to own office space, are now saying the technology infrastructure is there to be able to enable remote operation. And so when we think about what that looks like, clearly, having a strong CRM is important. Now, here's where the franchise brand, i.e., the franchisor, is going to typically have that tech stack, right? They're going to have their lead generation tools, their operational tools, their CRM that all the franchisees are using. And it's really critical that the franchisees are using it, right? Because any of these tools, if they're not being used, you're not going to get the value from them. But if done properly, it can really help improve the customer experience. And specifically, really, we're seeing AI and automation help brands better understand what their clients are looking for more effectively, making the client information gathering process so much easier, right? Tools like something as simple as I had a franchise brand come to our house to help us with renovating a closet, right? And it's a well established brand in that space. They showed up with an iPad and took pretty much all of the information they needed from us down via iPad, and also taking pictures, which automatically synced to their CRM. And they were able to give us a quote on the spot. They didn't have to go back and do some research, as probably would have been the case 10 years ago, right? And that's just one example. We're also seeing that automation tools are just making the human element that much more critical. What do I mean by that? Well, if you actually, this is a trend in customer service overall, but we're seeing it in the franchise space. If automation is taking away more and more of the times that you interact with a human, well, what that means is the few times that a human definitely is involved are that much more important. So brands and franchisees have to make sure that that human interaction is positive. Because if we go back 25, 30 years and someone had a bad experience, well, that's okay. You're going to deal with that customer again the next day on something else, or you're going to reach out to them again for something later that day. Well, no, today, if you get that wrong, you may not have another opportunity to interact with that customer for quite some time, right? And so the importance of improving the human experience to complement the automated experience is really important. And then finally, you're seeing a lot of opportunities for cost savings and efficiencies around areas such as administrative work. We're seeing a lot more franchisees using virtual admins and also automating some of the work. So I personally have a virtual admin who sits in the Caribbean. She's outstanding. And it's as if she's sitting next to me in terms of our ability to interact, because she has the same tech stack that I have as well. And I know many franchisees that are seeing benefit in that area as well. And I think the other piece that gets really important in this is something that, Frank, you will be near and dear for you, is obviously making sure that franchisee and a franchisor, both the individual location and the overall brand, are staying compliant in all of their filings, right? And I think where automation can be really helpful is you don't have to rely on someone remembering to do something, or someone doing something the right way and knowing how to do that. More and more, compliance becomes less of a guessing game and more of an automated series of workflows. And I think that's where FileForms can really help clients and franchisees in particular, and franchisors when it comes to their ability to make sure that they're properly registering with their government authorities.
Yeah, especially the first time business owners. A lot of folks that haven't ran businesses in the past. It's not something you'll learn on the banking job. Typically, it's rarely something you'll learn working for a corporation. But there are a lot of different phases of running a business, becoming an entrepreneur, and compliance is a big one. Sales, operations, also big. Having kind of strategic advisors like yourself, supporting along the way to kind of show them the path, and ideally avoiding the pitfalls, because in the early days, because you've only had so much saved up to do an investment or build a business, I mean, a lot of times the little things will add up, and the last thing you want to do is kind of administratively burden the business one way or another. So do you ever advise also on like the infrastructure on the back end, like getting set up payroll, QuickBooks, things of that nature? I mean, is that part of kind of what one could expect in working with you, Kishore?
Yeah, we do. And sometimes a brand will have their own expectations in that space. They want all their franchisees to have a consistent vendor experience. But if they don't, absolutely, we have those relationships that we can make introductions for the franchisees.
Very interesting. So what do we got next with remote franchises?
Yeah, so this is something we just were starting to talk about, right? I mean, we definitely are seeing the ability to grow and scale as a result of franchises not requiring new bricks and mortar locations. But the one thing to be very careful about is making sure a franchise brand has a track record. So part of that is doing your due diligence, reviewing the franchise disclosure document, having an attorney that understands franchise disclosure documents, review and give good guidance on what they're seeing in that. That franchise disclosure document is typically 180, sometimes 190 pages in terms of telling you everything, everything that one could imagine about a franchise. But it doesn't always. It's not always the easiest to read for someone that doesn't have a legal background. So having an attorney review the franchise disclosure document is really important. And why that's important is it tells you a lot about the history of that brand. It tells you a lot about their track record. It tells you about maybe have they had any lawsuits against them recently, et cetera. Doing due diligence on a brand is especially important if it's a newer brand. And why I say that in this slide is that we see a lot of newer brands in the remote space. Now, conversely, there are plenty of home-based or remote franchises that have been in business for decades. Some of them may not have been remote from day one. They might have only gone to a remote model more recently, but their history has been very, very strong. And I think I always recommend, where possible, be able to take a look at track record. And it's very important to talk to existing franchisees about their experience. Are they getting the support from the brand that they expected? How has this looked? And that's a process called validation, which is really a key step in the process as someone's evaluating a franchise.
I'm curious, when folks usually come to you, is it the franchisor that's facilitating setting up the legal entity, or typically that falls onto the franchisee and kind of their upstart costs?
Oh, it's the franchisee almost always.
Yep.
The expectation is the franchisee has set up a legal entity, and it's the legal entity that's actually signing the franchise agreement in most cases with the franchisor, the brand. So that needs to be done typically before signing an actual agreement. And often that is something that that the franchisee needs to be able to do. And that's why I think, again, FileForms can be very helpful in helping a new entrepreneur navigate what could be an overwhelming process in terms of where do I go, which entity, et cetera.
And do you see folks kind of forming in Delaware for benefits from a corporate law standpoint, or typically it's forming the entity locally? Obviously, this isn't legal advice. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of, I'd say more often than not locally, unless they have an attorney that's advised them to file elsewhere. So often people don't know what they don't know, right? And so I think being able to get strong guidance, and I know as part of kind of the FileForms offering, they can really better understand if Delaware is the right registration state for them, or Nevada, or what have you, right? And so I think that actually is a really important point that I don't see as many franchisees doing their due diligence on as they should be.
Right. And then when it comes to the real estate, sounds like real estate's no longer kind of in every deal you do, but those that do have real estate, do you know if that's typically kept in a separate LLC? Because obviously that's different from the relationship with the franchisor.
Yeah. Yes, if they're owning, mixed if they're renting.
Right.
This is kind of what I've seen.
Fascinating. So let's talk about the portfolio mindset.
Yeah. So a lot of people ask this question of how do I scale, right? If someone is looking to really build a very significant business. How do they do that? Because one unit of a franchise in some models actually can be a huge business in its own right. But in a lot of models, it's the multi-unit owner or even the multi-brand owner that actually is growing and scaling most effectively. What is that? What does multi-unit, multi-brand mean? So let's start with multi-brand, right? So what I see entrepreneurs doing is to really look at owning complementary brands that can support and provide services to the same group of clients, right? So, and maybe in home services, it could be a lawn care franchise that's adding a flooring component to it because a lot of their clients are their clients are homeowners, right? And that would work. In the senior care space, it could be a franchisee that is working with, let's say, home health care, right? Also, then doing estate sales, having a franchise that does estate sales separately from that. So, owning complementary brands is a good way to expand your portfolio, ideally, where you can go to the same clients and offer them more services. The other way I see franchisees grow and scale is multi unit. So that could be multi-location if it's a bricks and mortar. It could also be multi-territory, right? It could be if, a franchise says you have this territory, which usually they've drawn up based on their local market data, et cetera. Well, maybe it's buying a second, a third, a fourth territory to expand. But those are the two ways that I've seen franchises grow. And I think one of the things that's important as they do that is obviously having the right legal entities in place to support that growth. And again, that's, I know, where your team at FileForms can provide support. I would also say it is so important to have a CPA and an attorney as part of your professional team that actually understand business growth. So a CPA that has worked with entrepreneurs as they've grown, an attorney that understands the franchise space and can support them in doing that. I think that becomes really important as someone grows. And I've seen so many franchisees, by the way, that have come to us initially saying, yeah, I've just been doing my own taxes. I'm a W-2 employee my whole career. And, so is my spouse, and we just do it ourselves. It's, we don't have much more than that. Once you own a business, it is really important that you have a CPA that understands tax planning because there is so much, and in a positive way, there's so much that a business owner can do legally that oftentimes they're not even aware of that CPAs can help them navigate.
Certainly. I'm curious, do you typically see the multi-unit or multi-brand approach? Because I would expect if you learn a business and it goes well, it's probably easier to go that direction than getting into a whole different model, right?
Yes and no, right? I think it depends. I think sometimes it depends on the in the market, right? In that local market, are they finding there's too much saturation with trying to kind of expand geographically? In which case another brand makes more sense. It could also be sometimes if the brand is part of a same parent company and there's these umbrella franchise brands that sometimes own 10, 12 brands in similar spaces, there might be financial incentives to kind of basically buy another brand within the portfolio. So it can be actually either one. What I would not recommend is I have had clients buy multiple territories of one brand up front. That's very normal. I would not recommend buying two different brands up front because the onboarding and learning
Right.
both of those will obviously take some time.
Certainly. Yeah, that multi-entity approach, I think, definitely will uh, resonate with the folks we work with at FileForms. I mean, just the nature of dealing with multiple jurisdictions can be quite a lot to keep up with, especially depending on the state. So things such as annual reporting, electing a local registered agent, certainly depending on the industry too, the registered agent piece, we've seen home services providers definitely lean heavily on their registered agent, given all the legal notices that can come from that business. So having a benefit of a third party registered agent in there who's going to be attentive to all of those notices is super important. But yeah, the multi-state jurisdiction, we find a lot of CPAs are very comfortable filing in their own states. However, when they do have clients extend into a new jurisdiction, a lot of times that is where the CPA just wants to tap out and kind of offload the administrative burden of things such as annual reports or foreign qualifications, sales tax registration, payroll tax registration, certificates of good standing, getting EINs, of course, and the like. So yes, I definitely agree that we can help folks in the franchise space broadly, especially those with the kind of multi-entity, multi-brand focus. So let's talk about advisors and how they should be thinking about serving this demographic specifically.
Yeah, I think CPAs and attorneys absolutely are key partners, and I think it's really interesting to see how the most successful franchisees really view their CPAs and attorneys as thought partners. They look for them to provide strategic guidance, strategic support. I'll use it, CPAs, right? CPAs will typically charge for a strategy call, as they should, for their time. But for a good CPA, the return on investment that the franchisee gets by taking the time to have that strategy call with their CPA is absolutely significant. I mean, it's multiples of value in terms of the cost of that call. And I would say the same goes for working with a robust attorney who can help a franchisee really strategize and think through how they're going to grow, expand, or deal with any kind of challenge that they might be dealing with. I think the structure, the risk involved with the way that they're growing or they're approaching their current situation is really critical, right? And having the right CPA, the right attorney, the right professional partners can be the difference between success and failure in many cases. So I think that absolutely is key. And setting up the business is obviously one milestone, but successfully running the business and then expanding the business, growing the business, maybe even exiting on a sale. This is where at each of these steps, you do need these advisors to help guide you. And I think this is where there's going to be more and more growth in the franchise space. There's also a ton of growth right now in the sale of franchises and even non-franchise business because of the baby boomers retiring, right? And so kind of you have this group of people that are really interested in entrepreneurship. You have this group of people that are looking to, in some cases, sell their businesses. You have this group of, the franchise space that's expanding and really growing. And you also have the corporate world that is not as willing to have employees for life as they might have been in a prior generation. You put all those factors together, and there's just a lot of opportunity right now for advisors that really can add value to entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And I think it's about being a specialist. I think having that real domain expertise, like you mentioned, is super important. Just being able to really add value primarily through experience to clients, I think is going to be a huge game changer. That's why we like really honing in on the different industries like the franchise industry at FileForms, because we feel like we've served their type before and we can kind of offer the full suite of perspective because we've been there and done that. So this has been great. So in closing, let's talk about franchising reimagined and how we can walk through this.
Yeah, just summarizing. I mean, we've now talked about it's a wider range of industries than ever before. The reality is, if you can think of a business, there is probably an example of a franchise that does that. The importance of technology and having the right professional advisors around you, CPAs, attorneys, et cetera, make ownership achievable more than ever. And then finally, a quote that I saw recently is, franchising is really a structured tech-enabled path to entrepreneurship. And it's much more than fast food, right? And the QSRs, the quick serve restaurants that we always thought of franchising as in the past.
Without a doubt. Well, so interesting. We're here, both Kishore and myself, as you kind of go down your franchising journey. We'd love to get you started today with a legal entity so that you can kind of work with Kishore and his team and determine what is the right brand, what is the right industry, what's the right territory, and who are the right advisors to have on that franchising journey. I think it's a great opportunity. So many folks out there, breaking away from the corporate world, myself included, to become an entrepreneur. And, I think a lot of folks do benefit from structure quite a bit. And I think it's a good middle ground to kind of taking that leap of faith into entrepreneurship, but without, doing it with good structure and, a model that can work. So Kishore, in closing, how do folks get in touch with you? We'll leave contact info in the comments section, but any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say certainly LinkedIn, right? Would be one great way. You'll have my contact details, which you'll have my email and phone, and then our website, www.heliosfranchise.com. So would be delighted to speak with anyone and be happy to talk more about franchising.
Excellent. Well, that's all we have for today, folks. Thank you so much for listening in, and hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you.